My belief on ego is it's a necessity, and it's something that we'll never be able to escape. It's part of who we are. It's who we are. It's just a matter of how do we choose to utilize it. Is our ego assisting us, or is it holding us back? Michael Jordan was probably one of the biggest and the most egotistical sports figures we've ever had. And yet he was humble enough to wake up every morning and practice harder than anybody else.
This is Maestro Minute, the show that discusses all things real estate, sharing interviews with the most successful people in the industry. Hear from their perspective and what they are doing to achieve success. Get exclusive tips on how you can also succeed in real estate. Maestro Minute is brought to you by Maestro Development. Here's your host, Nareg Muradian.
But you reach a point where your confidence is great. Let's talk about like confidence versus ego and like how to manage both and what makes sense, you know? What's your perspective on ego versus purpose, and how, do you have too much ego, or how do you keep that ego in check? Like, what are some like nuggets you can give us on that?
That's definitely a deep subject. My belief on ego is it's a necessity, and it's something that we'll never be able to escape. It's part of who we are. It's who we are. It's just a matter of how do we choose to utilize it. One of the coaches I follow the most, and I read into, and I'm in one of his personal programs as we speak, is Tim Grover. Tim Grover was Michael Jordan's, personal trainer and coach for however long he played in the league. Ended up coaching Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and some of the other greats.
Crazy list of clients. That's crazy.
And Charles Barkley, you can name all of those. But the one thing that I took away the most from all of his readings, all of his material, is the ability to embrace the dark side. And I think a lot of times we get, you talk about ego. Ego is a part of your dark side because ego plays different roles. And I think ego can either be of assistance to you, or it could also be detrimental to your evolution and your growth. And I think as human beings, not as a coach, not as a developer or anything like that, if we're able to have the honest conversations with ourselves about whether is our ego assisting us, or is it holding us back? Because a lot of time the ego is going to use our shell of who we show up as every day as a protective mechanism. It's going to want to protect us from the stressors, from the people we may dislike, or we may think dislike us, right? So it becomes such a protective mechanism that we lose ourselves. We lose our true identity of what the ego is meant for, which is push us forward and elevate our performance, whether again it's in the gym or in life, right? So I think the importance of ego is being able to identify, no matter which walk of life you're talking about, whether it's in the gym, whether it's in your personal relationships, in your professional life, it's understanding the fine line between the ego becoming the dark matter that is pulling you down, or becoming the dark matter that is actually fuel for you. Because that dark matter that this coach, Tim Grover, talks about is about being able to embrace the bad side of you, the ego side of you. Because at the end of the day, that's again, you cannot escape that person. That person is within. And a lot of times most people are not willing to sit down with that identity because they're afraid that it's not pretty. It's not going to please the public. It's not going to be, you can't make money off of it because it's not pretty. It doesn't have this sense of like aesthetically pleasing thing. But on the contrary, I think that's where people need to spend more time in. Because I think we need to befriend those so-called demons and this so-called dark side that we all have within, because that's where we get to meet our true self. And when you're able to have that conversation, when you're able to bring it all together, you realize that you're all one. And that's when I think your ego gets in check, and your ego now becomes absolutely valuable to your growth, because now you've accepted all of yourself, the good, the bad, and ugly. And by doing so, you're allowing yourself to move forward as 100% yourself without having to water yourself down.
So let me ask you this. I love that. Like, I feel 100% what you're saying. How do you, I think sometimes I get mistaken for having a big ego when I don't feel like I do, but I feel like I'm just so confident. I embrace my ego, which drives me to accomplish more things and try to do more things, right? That's really my beast inside. but I'm a down to earth, humble person. But I think sometimes it comes across, or the perception comes that way. How do you maintain that ego and still kind of keep that humility and that being humble? Like, what's the balance there? How do you do that?
That's a great question. I think that's still something that I'm working on, you know.
You
How
don't,
do you,
you don't come across that way though, from my experience with you. I feel
it's
like you're
not about
super,
coming
yeah,
across that way. It's about carrying yourself that way. And I think that's, you know, that's where that identity kind of probably gets lost is you can still have an ego and be humble. And that's where confidence comes in. Confidence is an egotistical trait, is an
yeah,
ego trait, but it's not a negative trait. It's a good trait. You
right,
should be confident.
right,
Michael Jordan was probably one of the biggest and the most egotistical sports figures we've ever had. And yet he was humble enough to wake up every morning and practice harder than anybody else, even though he knew he was the best.
yeah,
That's confidence. That's ego because you know you're the best, but the confidence is going out and practicing every single day like it was your
yeah,
last practice. And again, having that balance, being able to find that balance or being able to manage the both at the same time is hard because we live in a society now, I believe so at least. We live in a day and age and in a society where most people want you to be, you know, real and honest with them. They want you to open up, you know, and be as transparent as you can be. But don't be it
yeah,
if it's not gonna make me feel good about myself. Right. So it's like you can't expect someone to be confident about their craft and about how they choose to carry themselves in their life, and yet ask them to lower that standard because it doesn't make them feel good about themselves. You don't ever do that. You don't dim your light
yeah,
because it shines too bright for someone's path. Like
right,
that's who you are.
right,
And at the end of the day, your light has to shine to keep the lights in your house, to
right.
keep the lights on in your house, to keep that fire inside of you.
This
By the
whole,
way, I don't mean
yeah,
to cut you off. I
yeah,
think it's, you know, I hope my answer helps people out there. I know it's such a deep topic. You know, we can spend hours talking about the difference between confidence, ego, which there aren't really any differences. It's just how do you work with it all? Because at the end of the day, you like I say, you can't escape ego, but you can lose your confidence.
yeah,
And when you lose confidence is when the bad ego comes in. And that ego that wants to protect you and the ego that's, you know, that may act
right.
off center because it's trying to protect itself. So that's why it's like
You got to be self-aware and
you
see
have to
that,
be
yeah,
self-aware. You have to self-practice.
yeah,
Self-practice is being able to have real deep, honest conversations with yourself about where you stand today as a man. What are you doing today to better yourself as a man, not as a coach, not as a real estate developer, not as the fucking president of the United States. What are you doing to get better at being you? Because no matter where you go in life, being you is going to annoy people as much as people are going to love it. But knowing not to water yourself down because people can't handle you at 100 proof is also a really hard thing to do.
Thanks for tuning in to the Maestro Minute podcast. Make sure to rate this podcast if you found it helpful, share it with a friend that could use it, and follow us on all major podcast platforms. The Maestro Minute, powered by Maestro Development.